It is Tuesday, and therefore it is Heard Online, a series of videos where we look closely at claims made about sleep on the World Wide Web to see if they're true or they're not true. And for those of you who are familiar with the channel and Heard Online, you can see that my mood is a little bit different than what it typically is, and it's because this has been a bizarre experience preparing for today's Heard Online. We're going to look at an interview between Dr. Chatterjee and a Professor Russell from Oxford University. And this is my second take. The first take, I just went over the first few minutes, and I was in a usual kind of like upset mood that I am when I hear these claims that have absolutely no substance. But then we went straight into bizarro land when I continued listening to this interview. And the way this professor tries to pivot and maintain the idea that sleep deprivation is really dangerous, but at the same time being really reassuring and that we shouldn't worry. He's just incredible. I hope I can make this video justice with my commentary and my reactions to it, but we are in for something really special today. So yeah, without further ado, I want to thank Don for pointing this interview out to me, and let's take a look at it from the very beginning.
Chronic sleep loss is associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes, high rates of infection, and indeed cancer. Because we haven't ever passed this information on, people don't know. And I think the key thing is...
All right. We'll pause there. And first of all, I want to say that, you know, we hear this claims all the time, right? Sleep deprivation is associated with type 2 diabetes and obesity and even cancer. And I think that's probably true. And are we surprised? Do we think that somebody who has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and who has, become obese and who has been told that they have cancer, do we think that will lend itself to sleeping really nice and sleep well and feel well? Of course not. Of course, anything that affects our health can affect our sleep. And then, and to twist that into saying, okay, well, if we just slept more, then of course that would fix these things. It is the same as, if somebody would investigate how we would feel like emotionally if we were told we had cancer, would we feel like really happy and excited about that? Of course we would be devastated. And then to say, oh, if you just felt, better, that would fix it. That is just insane. Honestly, it's just, it's so uninformed and so lacking of like, understanding that's how we sleep is a manifestation of like how we feel, and completely disregarding that leads to so much struggle. And so, when I was first reviewing this, I was kind of like in this upset mood, and also upset about the fact that, Dr. Russell is making the claim that we haven't informed the public enough about this, which is like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I live in a different multiverse, or, different universe in the multiverse, where in my universe, if the complete opposite had happened. Everyone thinks that we have to sleep at least 8 hours, or there's going to be some health issues. That's common knowledge. That's culture. And we haven't done enough to bust those myths. That's kind of how I see the universe. But anyway, that was just the intro there. Let's keep going.
A phrase I've heard you say in one of your talks before is alarm clocks stop the single most important behavioral experience we have.
Yeah, and that's sleep, of course. And we've so undervalued sleep. It's been treated as almost an illness that needs a cure or an indulgence. And of course, in the 80s, those of us that remember the 80s, people used to come and say, oh, I've done another all-nighter. And then people used to clap them on the back. And in fact, you don't want people like that in the workplace. I mean, essentially, what we've discovered over the past sort of 20 years or so is that sleep consolidates our memory, but it's not just the retention of facts. We're actually problem solving. So if you want to come up with innovative solutions to complex problems, a night of sleep achieves that. We're also discovering that the elimination of beta amyloid, this misfolded protein that's been associated with dementia, is packaged up and got rid of whilst we sleep. So much of the stuff going on within the brain and the body whilst we sleep defines our ability to function during the day.
Now, here are some other like really, really big claims that we're like, our experience is defined by how much we sleep. And there's also this insinuation that, oh, well, if we're not sleeping enough, this beta amyloid process can take place. And, maybe you will get Alzheimer's. It's not, the professor doesn't say that, but is implying that, which is of course super triggering, which will, you will really see why I think this is kind of interesting now when we see the rest of this interview. But yeah, let's keep going. In about 2 minutes in, there's another claim that just was I don't say, it left me speechless, I should say that.
And it's really, we've got to start embracing sleep.
As I read through your book and as I think about the literature, the work you're putting out there, I think about the impact that sleep deprivation has on our entire physiology. This idea that's been sitting with me the last few days is that, number one, a lot of us don't realize how sleep deprived we are.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways, the way we experience the world is influenced by our levels of sleep.
Yeah, I think that's what, during the research for the book, the realization that the tired brain remembers negative experiences but forgets the positive ones. So tired individuals' entire worldview is influenced by negative salience. We're making decisions, remembering the negative stuff and not the positive stuff. That's just one example, I think. Yeah.
That's really profound, Russell, because if as a doctor, I look around and I see how many problems we have these days with excessive negative thoughts that people struggle with.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the data in terms of how sleep deprived we are,
yeah.
potentially this is the smoking gun that's sitting there that if all of us started to pay a little bit more attention to,
yeah.
perhaps that would have a profound impact on the way we feel. And as you say, these negative thoughts.
Now, this to me, when I heard it the first time, it just made my mind explode, because the implied message here is basically that everything we're seeing in society that we call mental health, depression, negative thoughts like, anxious thoughts, and everything that we see, everything that we're suffering from globally could be fixed by just paying a little more attention to how we sleep and sleep a little bit more. That's just like, really? Or do we really think that our emotional state, our thoughts, our belief systems can be changed by just sleeping a little bit more? I mean, that claim is just so huge. And I know, again, I think Dr. Chatterjee seems super sympathetic, a very intelligent, thoughtful doctor who cares a lot for people. And then Professor Russell's so sympathetic, seems like, such a nice person. Yet they present these ideas that to someone who's had insomnia can be so triggering, and without any evidence whatsoever. There's no evidence whatsoever that little sleep causes any health issues or that it causes depression either, right? And then how about this claim that the lens, like our lens is blurred when we're tired? To me, that really there's a real complete disregard for our thoughts and emotions in context of fatigue. If somebody is tired because they were volunteering for several weeks and they didn't sleep much, and they were up half night, but they did something that they felt was so meaningful, so valuable, what lens will they look through the eyes through? I think it will be a beautiful lens. If somebody is tired and they're not sleeping much because they were forced to do something that they feel has absolutely no value, then they will be tired and look at the world through a different lens. But just saying that if we're tired, then we will just see the world like in a negative lens, I think that's a huge oversimplification. So anyways, I got to this point when I did my first version of this video. And then I kept listening to see if there's more to comment on, but there wasn't much. For like 25-30 minutes, they were just talking about chronotypes, and there was really nothing new. But then I got to like the 39th minute of this interview, and that's when things got really interesting, because at the 39th minute there, Professor Russell says that one of the great motivations for him writing his book was actually to bust myths. Dr. Chatterjee says that there are definitely a lot of sleep myths out there, and the professor wants to bust those. So let's hear about that.
It's this idea that sleep is highly individual.
Yeah.
And I know there's many myths out there that you're keen to bust, one of them being that we all need 8 hours.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was part of the motivation for writing Lifetime, because I think that there's been a tendency to feel that, we have to have a certain, we've got to get 8 hours. And I remember one person came up to me and they said, I don't get 8 hours of sleep. Am I going to die? And I sort of said, well, I can assure you, you will die, but it may not be anything to do with not getting 8 hours of sleep. And of course, I'm being a bit flippant, but actually the natural sort of span for humans is 6 hours to maybe 10 and a half hours. And so that's in the natural range. And I think people get very anxious that if they're not getting 8 hours, they're going to, it's going to be a disaster.
Now, this part, when I thought, this is when it started going to bizarre land, truly, for me, because, the discussion here has been all about like how important it is to get enough sleep. If you don't, well, they're implying that you can get type 2 diabetes and cancer and obesity, and you get depressed and all those things. But of course, you shouldn't worry if you're not getting 8 hours. No sweat. Like the normal span is 6 hours to 10 hours. Like, people come up to see and they're worried. Why are you worried? It's totally fine. I mean, like, I don't know what to say. I'm truly, like, I was speechless when I heard this. On one hand, I was happy. I was happy that, okay, this 8-hour sleep, this idea, that myth is beginning to kind of be dismantled. There's some cracks there, but then you just made all these cases that would make you think that it's really important to get 8 hours. And now, before we look at the last clip, which is really, really, really fascinating. I want to say that this is not a talk about insomnia, and a lot of people would say, hey, Daniel, like you're criticizing this, but this has nothing to do with insomnia. They're talking about sleep deprivation, just not getting enough sleep. And sort of my response to that is always like, okay, well, if you're making that case, then who are we really like preaching to here? Because if somebody's sleep deprived, I think it's either because either they have obligations, maybe somebody has small kids and they have to go to work, then they're going to be sleep deprived for that reason. If you tell that person sleep is important, you should prioritize sleep, they're just going to be super upset. Like, what do you think? I would like to sleep more, but I can't, right? And if you look at a person like the teenager who likes to play Counter-Strike half night and doesn't get enough sleep for that reason, and we tell them like sleep is important, you should sleep more, they're going to be like, no, I prioritize. I want to do this. This is what I like. I don't, they're not going to, like, that message is not like it's hard to see who that message is intended for. The one about like, if you're sleep deprived, you should sleep more, because the person already knows that. Right. And, what I found interesting was that my go-to like example of somebody who is sleep deprived is the parent, right? And now let's look at the final clip here, which occurs 49. We're going to go to 49:25 and see the final kind of plot twist here. Let's take a look.
My 3-month-old doesn't sleep through the night, or whatever's going on. So many parents get really scared when they hear this sort of stuff. So if we address parents first of all, short-term sleep deprivation, long-term, is it okay for a few years if a parent sleep deprived? Help us sort of get less scared about that if you can.
Well, I think there's two issues here. One thing that our society, or in the developed nations at least, has shifted very rapidly from the extended family to the nuclear family, where the parents become the sole providers for their children. And it's usually the mother. And what's happened up until fairly recently is that childcare was a distributed activity. And so when the mum got tired, there was an aunt or a sister or a friend who would take over so that the mum can get some sleep. And if you look at the primate societies, you see that care is distributed across the group. We have never evolved to be the sole parents, as it were, of our children. And I think the first point to make is that young mums in particular, but but both parents should not be afraid to reach out. And I think there's this sort of terrible guilt that I can't cope because I'm feeling tired. Well, no surprise. We never evolved to look after our children in this manner. So before babies are born, it's really important to think about the support network that you can put in place to try and mitigate some of the chronic sleep loss. Now, what are the long-term consequences of this? It's not clear. I suspect that there are probably buffers that kick in that actually prevent some of the damaging effects of chronic sleep loss during those sort of few months.
No, this is where I thought it was so fascinating, because apparently there are some buffers. Don't worry if you're a parent, if you have small kids, because some buffers will kick in. We're not really. There's no further explanation or in-depth discussion on what those buffers are and why they kick in only when sleep deprivation comes from being a parent and not other times when we are sleep deprived. Why aren't those buffers working otherwise and prevent us from these health problems for other reasons of sleep deprivation? This is very unclear, but part of me just really feels for Professor Russell here, because you can see that he's a very nice guy. He wants to be reassuring, but at the same token, like, you're not going to get funding and attention and interest to your field unless you say that not sleeping is really, really dangerous, right? So I feel for him, but it was really interesting seeing this, particularly with this the question leading up to this from Dr. Chatterjee is like so so understanding and so empathetic, thinking about people that have small kids and that they're scared when they hear this message and how they should relate to this. But anyways, yeah, it is an interesting world we're living in. The sleep world is very, very interesting. And this was, out of all the trips into Bizarro Land, this was maybe, this is one of the most strange ones, one of the most strange trips. But on the bright side, I think it is nice that there is at least a little bit of, a little bit of reassurance here. There is, the 8-hour sleep myth is being busted, and that is nice. But I wish, of course, that we could get completely away from the scaremongering, where we could see that there is no evidence whatsoever that sleeping less, whether it is in relation to insomnia or sleep deprivation from any other reason, why can't we see that has never been shown to cause any health problems, and relieve so many people of this pressure to sleep that keeps us from sleeping. I hope, of course, that's where we're heading. And this was hopefully this was a step in that direction by sharing what we just looked at. So anyways, curious to hear your thoughts about this. Please post them in the comments. And thanks, Dawn, for suggesting this video. And we shall go from there. Bye for now.